Good afternoon, Irish alumni, parents, and friends, and thanks for joining us here for another edition of Football Fridays at the Eck. I'm Chris Palmquist from the Notre Dame Alumni Association. And we have a great show lined up for you today as we get ready for game number 2 of this 2020 season tomorrow when the Irish host South Florida. We'll debut this week's What Would You Fight For story. We'll hear from a couple of Notre Dame's newest fans. We'll have performances from Harmonia and the Glee Club. And we'll be joined by special guest Lou Samoji from Blue and Gold Illustrated and former women's basketball coach Muffet McGraw. Our first guest this week, though, ran for 3,249 yards in 3 seasons for the Irish. That's good enough for 4th on the school's all-time rushing list. He's one of 5 men to lead Notre Dame in rushing yards for 3 straight seasons and was a key part of teams that went to back-to-back BCS bowl games. One of the best running backs in Notre Dame football history, Darius Walker. Darius, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me. I get so hyped when I see these hype videos. It kind of brings me back to the days of running out of that Fighting Irish tunnel. So I might have to do some push-ups in my bedroom here when we're done. But it's good to be with you.
I'm sure we could work in a few carries for you tomorrow. I'm sure Coach Keller will be on board with that. Now, I want to start pre your Notre Dame days, though, even before you were breaking Herschel Walker's Georgia high school touchdown record back in the day. Your family is definitely a football family. Now tell us a little bit about that and getting started with the sport.
Sure. So, no, I was really one of the lucky ones that as an infant, my father and my mom put the football in my crib, right? So I didn't have a real lovey. I had a small football. And so and my father was a football player. He played college football at the University of Arkansas, and then in the NFL for the Minnesota Vikings. And the cool part for him was at Arkansas, he actually played under Lou Holtz. And so I had known about Lou Holtz quite a bit before even becoming a Notre Dame football player, which was really, really cool. And so on my mom's side, her brother, my uncle, he also played in the National Football League as well at the University of Arkansas and then in the NFL for the Detroit Lions. So we really had a football family. I like to say I didn't really have much of a choice that I was going to be a football player, regardless of whether I really wanted to or not. And so I think it just worked out really well that I fell in love with the game the same way my father and my uncle did.
We're all glad they pushed you down that road a little bit as Notre Dame faithful here. Now, Let's talk back about your freshman year. The first game you don't play in a 3-point loss to BYU.
I didn't even travel on that week too.
I'm sorry?
So I didn't even travel to that game. I wasn't there.
Okay, well, you bounced back the next week against the top 10 Michigan team. You became really the offense in that game. 115 yards, 2 scores, and an upset win. What was that like for you being thrown into the fire in such a key role as a freshman?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of surprise, I think, for not only, the country and Notre Dame faithful, but really kind of for me as well, because you never really know how these things work out your freshman year. A year prior to that, I had been playing high school football in Georgia. So while I had the confidence to be someone who could, step in and play immediately, you kind of never really know how that's going to go. And after the loss to BYU, I know our team was really down. And the next week, Kyron Williams comes up to me and says, "Hey, I think you're going to get a chance to play." And so I was about as nervous as an 18-year-old would be being thrust into the fire there. But the one thing I always tried to remember to this day when I went into any kind of football game, and it really started in high school when I started thinking this way, was I was like, how do I block everything out and not allow the moment to be too big for me? So the way that I did that was I just focused on one play at a time. I literally said, okay, there's going to be a draw play right now. This is all I'm going to think about. I'm not going to think about any of the other factors, whether it's the 80,000 fans sucking up all the air and the oxygen in the stadium or looking into the eyes of my teammates, regardless of what it may be. I tried to block everything out and just focus on that one play. And so it was really fun to be a part of that, not only a part of the Irish, but a part of that Michigan game for sure, because that was a pretty big deal, beating them on our own home turf. So that's one of the ones that it really stands out for me that I'll always remember for sure in terms of my Fighting Irish football days.
You mentioned Kyron Williams. Of course, after your freshman year, he was let go, him and the coaching staff who really recruited you to come to South Bend. Charlie White comes in. What's a coaching change like that like for a player?
Well, for me, it was a freshman year all over again in terms of learning a new offense. I had my freshman year under Kyron Williams and his staff. And then when Charlie Weiss came in, it was a freshman year again because I had to learn a whole new offense. But I think the cool thing about Charlie Weiss coming in was, he had such a stigma having been in the NFL for so long. I remember a lot of us, especially myself and, whether it's Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija, all of my teammates, we thought about, oh, this is awesome. We have a guy here who has this NFL pedigree. There's got to be so much that we can learn from him. So what a valuable and incredible opportunity that we had. But it definitely was an adjustment in the first year because complex wise, in terms of Charlie Weiss's offense, it's a dictionary in terms of his size. So you had to learn a heck of a lot in a short amount of time. But I think that also made it exciting for us as well.
Those last 2 years in South Bend, you mentioned Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija. The offense really clicks. You yourself have over 1,500 total yards both of those years. Team goes to 2 BCS games, the Fiesta Bowl after your sophomore year, the Sugar Bowl after your junior year. What are some of your favorite memories from that time?
I got to be honest. I think the funnest part for me always was after games. We always had such a good time in the locker room, especially after big wins. I think if there's anything that I miss from football, the biggest thing would be the camaraderie that you feel after a big win in the locker room. With championships, you see people doing the champagne or whatever it is. It's not to that degree, but it's definitely a lot of fun when you can look at your teammates, some folks who you've been in the trenches with on a day-to-day basis, and you have a big win. So that to me is really a lot of the stuff that stands out from those 2 years. But I think offensively, we were really lucky. I mean, we had so many weapons that it really made it difficult for any defense that we were playing to really kind of nail down on one guy. And I think that's what made it so exciting was we all knew that we were going to have opportunities because there were so many other good players, at least for us on offense, on the other side, on our side of the field. So whether it was me, Jeff Samardzija, Maurice Stovall, Anthony Fasano was another guy we had, Brady Quinn, of course. So it was a lot of fun to be a part of some of those teams, especially offensively.
I want to leave a little bit of time for questions from our audience here, but right before we get to that, since you left Notre Dame, you spent some time in the NFL, spent some time as a college football analyst, came back and got your degree. Give us kind of an update on what Darius Walker has been up to since that time.
Sure. So immediately after Notre Dame, was lucky enough to play in the NFL for 5 years, lasted 5 years in the league. I played 3 in Houston with the Texans and then spent my last 2 years with the Denver Broncos. Jumped into broadcasting like a lot of former players do, and literally have really been doing that since 2011. I started out at ESPN and then went to Fox and then went back to ESPN as a college football analyst. So that road has certainly been fun. And then more recently, I actually work for Notre Dame now, the University of Notre Dame, on the development side, which has really been something that has been incredibly fulfilling for me. I had also spent some time at Morgan Stanley as a private wealth advisor. So I had like a bit of a finance pedigree. And then I got recruited into this role to help out on the development side, specifically for our benefactors in Los Angeles. And it's been incredible because Notre Dame is a great place, but to be able to have an impact in this way in helping families really realize their philanthropy and their dreams in philanthropy through a place like Notre Dame is incredibly fulfilling. So I've enjoyed that so much. I've been in development for Notre Dame for about 2 years and cover a lot of folks in the Los Angeles area. So it's been a fun ride up to this point, and I'm loving it.
We're happy to have you back here on campus. Well, at least as working for the university. We have an audience question talking to you about your favorite non-football memory from your time at Notre Dame.
I think the grotto definitely comes up quite a bit for me. There were many times and many instances, and I'm assuming all students kind of go through this, where it's like there's so much pressure on you as a college student, especially as a student athlete at Notre Dame. You have so much pressure. So I had many, many moments where I could go to the grotto, whether it was late night, early mornings, and it'd only be me and a few people out there, and just a lot of zen and tranquility in those moments. So those definitely stick out for me because they're so personal. And every time I go back to the grotto now, I relive a lot of those memories, which is nice.
I want to ask you about the football team this year, especially Kyron Williams. He really burst onto the scene last week, had a great game. Obviously, a little something about running back play. What stood out to you about Kyron's performance last week?
Well, for starters, with it being his first start, I think that's always huge. Anytime you can have a big impact in your first start, I think that's a really big deal. And not to mention he's doing it in a pandemic, so there's a lot of other stuff off the field that he's dealing with. But the thing that always impresses me the most about running backs these days is an ability to catch the football out of the backfield, and he did that really well. So I think the sky is really high for him because he has the versatility to obviously run between the tackles, but also catch the football out of the backfield. Now, I will say to him, please don't break any of my records at Notre Dame, but I think he's got a really high ceiling for sure.
I think we have time for one more question here from the audience. Now, you were recruited by multiple schools, obviously coming out of Georgia. How did you end up coming to Notre Dame? What was that determining factor?
I think for me, it kind of came down to three things, Chris. So the one was to be able to play national football on a big level, which Notre Dame certainly had. The second piece was the education piece. We talked about my dad and my uncle. My mom was a school teacher, and she worked as a counselor as well her entire career. So education was something that was really important to our family. And so the education component had to be there for a college for me. So Notre Dame checked that box as well. And then the last one really was faith. I come from a family that's very faithful. We went to church every Sunday. We prayed a lot. And so Notre Dame really was kind of the only place that gave me all three. I was lucky enough that I really could have hitched my wagon to any university across the country. I was very fortunate to have over 60 scholarship offers to play anywhere and all across the country, which was incredible. So I really couldn't have made a bad decision. But in terms of Notre Dame, it really was the only place for me that had all of the three big things that I wanted.
Real quick, before we let you go, give us a score prediction for tomorrow's game against USF.
I think it's going to be 32-14.
32-14. We'll go ahead and Sharpie that in, and we'll hold you accountable for it.
Sounds good.
Darius, thanks so much for joining us today.
A lot of fun. Appreciate it, Chris.
All right, Darius Walker, everybody. Now, while we're home gating tomorrow, leading up to kickoff against South Florida at 2:30 Eastern, and a reminder, that game can be seen on USA Network, some of us will mix up a drink to go with our pregame fare. The legendary Murph from Roars inside the Morris Inn here on campus shows us how to make Father Ted's Manhattan.
We are here at Roars. I'm Murph. This is the new bar on campus. It was dedicated in July of 2020. It was donated by Mr. Rohr, Jim Rohr. We are here making the Hesburgh Manhattan. It's a specialty drink that has been featured at the Morris Inn since the 70s. And I am joined today by...
I'm Alicia.
I'm Rhino.
And today, Alicia is going to be making the drink.
So for the Hesburgh Manhattan, it's going to be 2 ounces of Lot 40 rye.
Hey Murph, didn't they switch to Lot 40 since Canadians Club recipe changed so often?
We did that because the Lot 40 is an upgrade on the rye, I should say. And it's peppery, it's spicy, and the Kochi vermouth adds taste to it.
So for your vermouth, it is 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, 2 dashes of cherry and vanilla bitters. And then we put it in this mixing glass and stir it rather than shake it. Because over shaking dilutes the cocktail. Stir it about 20 times. And then we'll strain it over fresh ice. And then garnish with 2 Luxardo cherries.
And the reason for the cherry bitters is Father Hesburgh was with Alan Simpson, Senator of Wyoming, on his 90th birthday. And they decided to add cherry juice. And from that point on, they enjoyed it and had it and added that to the mix.
Great stuff from the Morris Inn. Now, the atmosphere of a Notre Dame game day is something most of us miss quite a bit. The player walk, the band concert on the steps of Bond Hall, the sights and smells of tailgating, and of course, performances from Notre Dame's talented students. Founded in 2000, Harmonia is Notre Dame's premier all-female a cappella group, and has been a Football Fridays fan favorite for years. Here they are with Here Come the Irish.
Hi, we're Harmonia. We're Notre Dame's premier female a cappella group. We're going to be singing Here Come the Irish for you today. Have a great Football Friday and go Irish!
Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Well, I remember the leaves are falling and far off music like pipes are calling, and I remember the golden morning. I saw the long ranks as they were forming, and there's a magic in the sound of their name. Here come the Irish of Notre Dame. The pilgrims follow to sacred waters, and arm go the sons and daughters. The drums are rolling and forward bound. They're calling spirits up from the ground, and there's a magic in the sound of their name. Here come the Irish of Notre Dame. Pastor. And there's a magic in the sound of their name. Here come the Irish of Notre Dame. And there's a magic in the sound of their name. Here come the Irish of Notre Dame.
Thank you, Harmonia, for that great rendition of Here Come the Irish. And later on, the Glee Club will also join us for the Victory March, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And last Saturday's 27-13 win over Duke marked the first conference win in Notre Dame football history, a history that dates back to 1887. To talk about that win and look forward to tomorrow's matchup with South Florida, I'm excited to welcome back Lou Emoji, senior editor in Blue and Gold Illustrated and member of the Notre Dame class of 1984. Lou, thanks for joining us again.
Always honored to be here.
Now, let's start with that Duke game last week. After one spring practice, schedule changes, starts and stops to camp, and more schedule changes, we actually played a football game. What are your thoughts about starting the season and winning a conference game for the first time ever?
Well, I'm sure there may have been some initial reservations about starting the season with 3 straight 3-and-outs, but that was, there's going to be expected to be some rust there. They eventually settled in. There was a change of blocking schemes that they've had to practice that maybe they didn't practice as much as they needed to through an entire spring. And then you missed 3 practices in a row in August because of a brief spike on campus. And then you have some new running backs there as well. And sophomore Kyron Williams, who had 205 total yards, total offense. Freshman Chris Tyree. It's almost like the depth chart at running back was flipped. And then with the receiving core, you know, he not only lost 2 second-round picks with Claypool and Komet, but a guy who caught over 100 passes in Chris Fink. But now you lost your second unit pretty much too, because Braden Lindsey was out with a hamstring. Kevin Austin is sidelined for a couple of months here with foot surgery. And then Ben Skoranek, the transfer from Northwestern, the graduate transfer, he pulled a hamstring as well. So took a while to get that chemistry. Eventually it came about in the second half, and they were able to lean on the defense, just like the 2012 and 2018 teams that finished 12-0 did for a good portion of the season before the offense really was able to find its rhythm.
You just mentioned Kyron Williams there. We talked about him a little bit last week too, over 200 yards rushing and receiving, a pair of touchdowns. What stood out to you about his performance?
Well, it surprised me because we were hearing so much, and this wasn't necessarily just the coaches, but it was going to be a running back by committee. Well, it was more like a running back by monopoly, because he took 52 snaps, and the next guy, Chris Tyree, took 13. So 4 times as fewer snaps there. You thought it would be a little bit more balanced out. I thought maybe maximum he'd get 9, 10 carries, maybe catch a couple passes, but they kept feeding him the ball. 19 carries, 112 yards, then caught a couple of screen passes there for 93 yards as well. So there just seems to be a great confidence in the coaching staff of what he's able to contribute. And then I think it also reflected in the way Kyron played. Now he's going to miss some holes, miss some blocks, although he didn't have that blitz pickup on the 17-yard touchdown pass to Avery Davis in the fourth quarter. I mean, it wasn't a rock'em block, but he did his job to get the defender away from Ian Book to give him that extra second to make the play.
Let's look ahead now to South Florida. Only one previous matchup between Notre Dame and USF that came back in 2011. It was not a good game for Notre Dame. One of the strangest days at Notre Dame Stadium. What do you remember about that day in 2011?
Oh, gosh. It was just – I'm going to have a feature on that on Friday, but it was just so surreal. There were 2 delays there that lasted about 3 hours because of lightning. So you had to evacuate the stadium twice. Notre Dame's opening drive, they go 76 yards in 7 plays, and then all of a sudden a fumble by Jonas Gray is returned for a touchdown the other way. You have a 14-point swing right away. Skip Holtz, the son of Lou Holtz, is on the other sideline as the head coach. And, the darndest thing about that, that's probably considered the biggest win in South Florida history. And after that game, Skip was 7-16. At South Florida, and he was released from his job. He's doing a heck of a job now at Louisiana Tech. He's 6-0 in bowl games there, so he's landed on his feet very well. But just a surreal atmosphere. 5 turnovers by Notre Dame, none for South Florida, and 3 of those 5 turnovers came in the red zone. So Notre Dame, I believe, had exactly double the yardage, 508 to 254. But when it's 5 turnovers to 0, that's chances aren't very good.
That makes a big difference. Now, this year's South Florida team has a new head coach, former Clemson co-offensive coordinator Jeff Scott. Also have a familiar name at offensive coordinator, a young guy by the name of Charlie Weiss Jr. What do you expect out of the Bulls?
How ironic is it that in the second visit by South Florida, you're once again dealing with the son of the former Notre Dame head coach. And Charlie Jr. is the youngest offensive coordinator at 27 in the Football Bowl subdivision. And Tommy Rees, his counterpart at Notre Dame, is the second youngest at 28. So, their offense was among the worst in the country last year. That's a big reason why they had to change. I mean, just 3-4 years ago, they had one of the top passing offenses in the country. They were top 25 team, both in 2016, 2017. There's some, mainly the passing game is the issue there, but even more so in the opener against the Citadel, 3 of their starters on the offensive line were quote unquote unavailable. And a 4th, a backup who's 365 pounds, also was unavailable, which leads to some speculation or interpretation that there must have been a coronavirus outbreak there. So that is a huge, huge X factor in this game, is how available are those 3 starting offensive linemen. One of them, Donovan Jennings, 338 pounds, he's an NFL prospect. And the other one next to him, he's 337 pounds, Demetri Harris. So they have a massive line, and they have quick, efficient running backs there. Kelly Joyner Jr., he had 87 yards, 3 touchdowns last week against the Citadel. But they have a 5'5", 172-pound scat back, Johnny Ford there. As a freshman a couple of years ago, he ran for nearly 800 yards. He's a dynamic guy in the slot, can beat you like Kyron Williams with the run or pass. But so much of it really depends, I think, on getting that line back together, because Notre Dame's defense once again proved how strong it can be. And their passing attack is very, very average. They may alternate quarterbacks there like they did last week. One of them was a pretty good runner, had 7 carries for 49 yards. But I don't know if Charlie Jr. wants to go to a quick up-tempo type of style, which, you know, he's done in the past when he was at Florida Atlantic with a very successful stint under Lane Kiffin, because this is the type of game maybe you might want to try to control a little bit more and not get it into too fast pace, because otherwise Notre Dame could jump out quickly. And I'm sure Notre Dame is looking for a much quicker and better start than they had last week.
By all accounts, it kind of sounds like South Florida is not quite there yet, even though they may be trending in the right direction. A lot of enthusiasm around Coach Scott and Charlie Weiss Jr., as we just talked about. But Vegas has Notre Dame as another big favorite, about 25 points. So heading into tomorrow's, what do you see as a key to the game, and maybe a prediction from you?
Well, the number one key is don't beat yourself in these type of environments, because that's what they did against South Florida in 2011, the 5-0 turnover advantage. Look, there's not a lot to analyze here. Notre Dame is a clearly better team. They're, you know, I think they're projected as a potential playoff team, and South Florida was picked to finish 10th in the 11th team AAC. So, you know, the keys to the game is don't blow it with turnovers. Don't have a -5 area there like you did the last time, and just remain patient too, just like you did against Duke. Don't panic when things don't go your way right away, because then maybe the frustration starts settling in, and then South Florida starts picking up some confidence, and then that throws you off your game a little bit. There's a reason why Notre Dame is a 25-point favorite.
Lou, as we wrap up here, tell us quickly where people can find your work.
We're on blueandgold.com. We've had, about 20 articles since Monday. I really recommend reading Andrew Mentock's feature on Charlie Weiss Jr. Andrew went to school with Charlie Jr. at St. Joseph High School here, just right down the road. And just a lot of interesting backdrop there on it. And then we had our on paper feature, the matchups, and several other things with the South Florida feature, as well as Liam Eichenberg, and we'll have Joe Wilkins and Isaiah Foskey, and a number of other features prior to the game.
Lou, thanks again for joining us. We'll chat with you a couple weeks down the road. Now, as we know, things inside the stadium look a little different this year than they ever have before. But the Notre Dame student section is still in the stadium, doing their part through cheers that many of us know and love.
My favorite cheer is going like this during that one band song. Gets me so hyped.
The Celtic chant, but this one.
I like this one.
Dun, 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 dun. That one's pretty good. I like that one.
The hand thing, I don't know what it's called, but it's fun. I like it.
My favorite cheer would have to be the push-ups after we score a touchdown. So like this, I guess.
Touchdown push-ups. It's not a cheer, but we just go like that. The touchdown push-ups.
The Alumni Network actually gave out the traditions book, which we've been looking at, which has been really helpful because we're learning all the signs and when to do them.
Yeah, I like that one. Probably the Zom cheer, but I probably can't show it. My favorite cheer. It's explicit. I like the Zom one though.
Cheer, cheer for old Notre Dame. Like the, the fight song.
Now, as you may already know, during every home football game, the university releases its latest What Would You Fight For segment. This series highlights the work that Notre Dame faculty, alumni, and students are doing as a force for good in the world. But you get a first look at the spot right here during Football Fridays at the ECK. Enjoy fighting for resilient communities.
Muddy is our heart. It's our eyes. We used to feel like we had the whole world. It was always our sanctuary.
I love everything about Mati. For us, it's a paradise.
More than 100 killed in the worst wildfires to hit Greece.
I remember seeing only flames and nothing else. I could not distinguish where the road was, where the trees were, or if there was anything around us. I don't know how I escaped it. We thought we would never be vulnerable to any situation. And this fire exposed it all.
In the fall of 2019, Notre Dame architecture students traveled to Mati, Greece, to help the city develop plans to rebuild.
The curriculum of the School of Architecture engages the critical issues of our time. Going to Mati and dealing with the issue of wildfires is really part and parcel of the entire purpose of our curriculum. Make an assessment about what is undamaged, damaged, and what's destroyed.
Mati itself was set as a city where there are 13 ways in and only one way out. We were looking to create more viable paths of egress out of the city in the event of another fire.
The purpose of the project was to design one master plan. It takes into account fire defense zones on the north and the west. It creates greater accessibility to the street network and to the sea, but also preserve the identity and beauty of the place as it was, while ensuring its future safety.
The University of Notre Dame asks, what would you fight for?
Fighting for resilient communities.
We are the Fighting Irish.
To discuss fighting for resilient communities, I'm excited to welcome back Double Domer and Director of Multimedia Services at Notre Dame, Beth Rizzoli. Beth, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here.
As you and I were talking a little bit earlier this week, we were struck by the timeliness of this piece, considering the wildfires raging on the West Coast. What were Professor Lakoutis' thoughts about the prevalence and increasing threat those pose, not just in Greece, but around the world?
I know we shot this last fall when the students went to Greece, and little did we know the west coast of our country would be on fire this week when we run this story. We did check in with Michael this week and talked about that a little bit. And he just commented that, it's very obvious this is going to be an increasing threat around the world. And so that as architects, they need to not only consider redesigning buildings and communities for their economies and the well-being of those societies in the future, but they have to really consider their design and mitigate for the effects of climate change and to ensure fire resilience to the best of their abilities.
You mentioned something about architects having to look ahead, and that's a great segue into a piece that you guys did last year about Notre Dame architecture students working with the Navajo Nation on redesigning and rebuilding schools. What does that continued work beyond campus say about the Notre Dame architecture program?
Oh, well, I think it just lines up with our mission so beautifully. They do reach out to and connect with vulnerable communities and ways to help them, but more so, it gives our students real life experience. We learn in the classroom, we learn from renowned professors, and we do studio work. But until you get out into the real world and you hear from people what their needs are, what their challenges are, these problems aren't always easy to solve. And it really enhances the education of our students. And we really are sending out future architects that are well-trained and ready to take on challenges.
Beth, another great piece by you and your team. Thanks again for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, whether it was in the stadium, on the radio, or on TV, most of us can remember our first Notre Dame football game. For me, it was sitting with my parents in our living room watching the 2002 season opening 22-0 win over Maryland in the Kickoff Classic. Many Irish fans, though, start even younger.
Some of us find Notre Dame football on our own and fall in love with the tradition and pageantry of a South Bend Saturday in the fall. Others become fans because their parents are alums or Subway alums. A lot of us might not even remember how our fandom started because, well, we've been wearing blue and gold since before we could walk.
It's something I wanted to pass down to the kids and have tried to instill in them, or some people would say brainwash into them.
Robert Cross grew up as an Irish fan in Florida. When he was accepted into the Notre Dame Law School, he and his wife Kelly made the move to South Bend, and it didn't take long for Notre Dame to gain another fan.
We lived right off campus. Everyone, it was really a community. And so it was such an easy transition to just totally fall in love with Notre Dame and what the tradition and the celebration every weekend. So to pass that on to our children, it's exciting.
And that's what they've done. Olive was born shortly before Notre Dame's Citrus Bowl win after the 2017 season and was cheering on the Irish.
I like to watch football with Daddy.
Before she knew it.
We had her all dressed up and just laid on my chest, and it was the first time being out of the hospital and having just 2 or 3 hours to do nothing but watch football. Then obviously I couldn't yell or go nuts with a little tiny newborn on my chest, but it's cool to have those pictures so when she's a fan and grows up, she can look back and say, look, just a few days after being born, here I am with my dad watching the game.
Before kickoff this year, the Cross clan grew by 2 as Lucas and Lila became the newest Notre Dame fans. They're 1-0 as part of the Irish faithful and have high expectations for the rest of the season.
I think if they can tighten up the offensive line, Lucas and I seem to think they've got a pretty good shot. So if they do win a national title, you can thank Lucas and Lila Cross for that.
Go at it!
The Notre Dame class of 2042. We're always looking for more stories about the Notre Dame family. Maybe you have a great dome or den or a fun memory about your first time on campus. Whatever it is, we want to know about it. Comment or send us a message and you might see it highlighted here on Football Fridays later this season. Now, our next guest is one of the greatest coaches in Notre Dame athletics history. She won 2 national championships, ranked 6th all-time among NCAA Division I coaches in wins, and was elected to the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2017. Earlier this week, Muffet McGraw joined Dolly Duffy, the executive director of your Notre Dame Alumni Association, to talk about retirement, activism, and meals with Muffet.
Good afternoon, Muffet. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great on this beautiful fall day. Dolly, how are you?
Doing really well. I wish we were doing this together in person. It's always a lot more fun when I get to see you.
Definitely.
So after 33 years of really, really intense focus, this is the first fall that you have been retired. And I'm not a person that uses air quotes, but I feel like I need to on that word retirement. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing since your retirement.
Well, who thought I would retire and spend the next 6 months trapped in my house? I don't think that was the plan initially. So I really wanted to get out and do some things in the community, and I started having food drives. I started in my neighborhood and gradually worked around till I did 29 food drives this past 6 months and got to 20,000 pounds of food that I collected. So really excited about that, what we could do in our community. And I wrote a book and I finished that in July. And now I'm teaching in Mendoza, teaching a class in sports leadership, which I love. I feel like I'm coaching again.
What do you love the most about it? What gets you excited about that class? Because I know
I
you
love the
said you
engagement
really
with the
enjoy it.
students. Just being around this age and the students, they really they're just so fun to be around. And I've got 10 athletes in the class, so there's a lot of talk about teams, team chemistry, culture, leadership. There's so many things that I feel like over 40 years of coaching, I've learned a few things, and I'm really anxious to share it with them.
So 40 years of coaching, and it's now September. This is the first time that you're not going straight into a season. What does that feel like?
It feels great. It does. I think that always having that just laser focus on one thing, it was a lot for 40 years. So I think it's been fun for me to kind of put my hand in a lot of different things, to see what else is out there, to turn a corner, turn the page, however you want to look at it, and do something new. I can get excited about doing something new.
So what's one of the things that you have not yet started, but's on the horizon that you'd like to do? Anything?
Well, traveling would be nice. Remember flying? That would be great. We were planning to go to Ireland, of course, for the football game, and I was going to do some clinics over there. I had a whole thing set up, so that was disappointing. And love to get out and just get around the country and see some things that I never had a chance to do.
Any place in particular?
Not really. I'm excited about just seeing this country, but of course we do want to go back to Ireland. Like to go up to Canada and see how things are. As soon as people start letting us back in, I'll try to make some trips.
So when we go play over there, hopefully sometime in the near future, let's plan to have a pint together.
I would love that.
So the transition has been somewhat seamless, or you
it really has. I think because of the pandemic, it's been a lot easier. I haven't even had a chance to miss anything because there really wasn't anything going on. There wasn't any recruiting this summer. Everything was over virtual. There hasn't been a whole lot of practices yet. So I think it was a nice segue for me to kind of just step back and not being involved in the recruiting, which, I would be panicking right now. What about official visits? We can't have anybody on campus. We're in a dead period now. I've got to call these recruits. And first day of phone calls, I got a call from a coaching friend who said, "Do you miss this?" And I said, "What's today? I've already forgotten."
So are you involved at all with the athletic department? I know that Jack has always relied on you.
Well, I love working with Jack. He is just somebody who's got such great vision. I can learn a lot from him in terms of leadership. So I am. I'm hoping to bring the coach's perspective into some of his meetings and some of his decisions, and just give him somebody to kind of bounce things off of to see what it's going to look like. But I really want to stay involved, so I will be in the athletic department doing some things for him.
You've always, now, shifting away from the court, you've always been a huge advocate for women, for social issues. And this summer, with all of the racial unrest, a lot of your former players were speaking out about what's happening. What are your thoughts?
I was so happy to see them step up and take a lead and to use their voice in their communities. You saw Breonna Turner, she was on Sports Center quite a few times, Skylar Arike, Natalie Achamwa here in Indianapolis. There were so many of them that were just willing to step up and say what they needed to say. And I think it started with us back in 2014 when we wore the "I Can't Breathe" t-shirts before one of our games. And it's a lot of controversy. We got some pushback on that. But when you know in your heart that this is right and this is the right thing to do, that's what I wanted to teach them, to stand up and speak out for what you believe in.
And did you ever think that all the teaching and all the words and all the education that you gave them so broadly would manifest itself like this?
I think you hope when you send them out, kind of like being a parent, right? You do what you can, you send them off out into the world and you see how things turn out. And I couldn't be prouder of all of the women that represent Notre Dame women's basketball. They are all doing great things in their communities. And I'm just so proud of what we've done here and the way they continue to represent us.
Speaking of doing great things in the communities, you mentioned all the food drives that you're doing, and you have really kind of a servant's heart. And I think that that's really evident in so many things that you do. And so we were really fortunate to partner with you on a new program that's underway called Meals for Moffat.
And I couldn't be happier, Dolly. I was so excited when we talked about this during one of the marches around campus, just to see our alums, because you know that they are so interested in community service. They're interested in getting involved. And we wanted something they could do in their own communities. This is something across the country. When you look at September as the Hunger Awareness Month, and you look at the lines at the food banks, and you think in your own community, people who have lost their jobs, people you don't even know how they're struggling, and everybody wants to help. They want to do something. And this is such a great opportunity. It's easy, it's fun. You can get your kids involved, get them out there experiencing some community service. And it can happen across the country. And we are going to make some great donations to the food banks in all of those local areas. So we're hoping for 100,000 pounds. We've already got 30,000, which that's well over 100,000 pounds. If you look at it, I think every dollar is almost 4 pounds of food. So 60,000 pounds of food and $30,000. And it's all because of you and your leadership in the alumni clubs.
So we're gonna blow that out of the water.
Yeah, I hope so.
So let's tell everyone, encourage them. Anyone can do this, right?
Well, absolutely anyone. It doesn't have to be anybody that's associated with the Notre Dame club. You can just, like I did, start in your own neighborhood. Just go pass out some flyers, put them in the mailbox, call your local food bank first. Make sure they're accepting donations. Make sure that you know exactly where it's going to go. You want to use their decals and their logos so that people know that this is something that's official. And just get out and do it. And I had so much fun collecting. People put stuff at their mailboxes. If it was raining, I left them on the porch. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I could wear a mask, but I didn't really need to because I was the only one out there. And got some friends to volunteer with me, and I had some great neighbors that helped me out all the time. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm looking for more neighborhoods.
So how do you know that 60,000 pounds and $30,000 have already been collected?
Well, you can go to your website, which is mealswithmuffet.nd.com.edu, and see how things are going on there. And it's a competition. We're in this to see who the winner is. So we've got some great prizes, and we're not even going to tell you what all of them are because they're going to be spectacular.
So if I'm just a sole proprietor and I want to do this, can I donate 100 pounds or 5 pounds and then go in and just log on so they can keep track of it?
Absolutely. And that's what we would love to see, because we want everybody to get involved, and every little bit helps, no matter what you get. If you get 50 pounds, if you get $50, no matter what it is, we want to get this big number so that we can look across the country and say, Notre Dame alums and Notre Dame fans, our Subway alums, and just everybody that's interested in community. This is something that we like to do at Notre Dame. We pride ourselves on being a service-oriented group. And we can kind of brag a little bit to our friends that are going to different schools and tell them that, look what Notre Dame did. We are #1 in community service in this country.
So we're halfway through the month, and we should more than double what we already have. Is that fair to say?
Boy, I hope so. I'd like to see us at least get over 100,000 and see what we can do. But, you can help us. Just get out in your neighborhood, do something. When you go to the food bank, they have things there that weigh the food when you bring them in. So make sure you get that on the scale, count the money, turn it all in, and just send us the results, and we will post it all.
So it's interesting that somebody who probably has not wondered where a meal was going to come from is so passionate about the issue of hunger. Where did this come from?
Well, I think that there's so many of us that are blessed to have what we have and to have been given so many amazing gifts. And so now it's my turn to give back to the community. All of these fans we've had coming to our games, all the people that have supported me in our program all these years, I want to do something for them, and I want to do something for people who really need it. So this was something, even while I was coaching, we would volunteer at the food bank all the time. It was one of our favorite places to go. We made it fun. Of course, we made it a competition, how many bags we could fill and how much we could sort. But it's just so important, I think, to be involved. And what a great lesson to teach your kids, especially during this time.
That's great. Muffet, thanks for your time. Thanks for your friendship. And thanks for your mentorship. I watch you and I learn from you.
Well, Dolly, I love working with you. Can't wait for our next project.
Thanks. Take care. Stay healthy.
See ya.
Go Irish.
Yes.
And again, that website, mealswithmuffet.nd.edu. Still plenty of time for you to get involved with that nationwide food drive. Well, that'll just about do it for us for this edition of Football Fridays at the ECK. But a reminder to stay tuned in just a few more minutes for Chalk Talk with Bill and Bill. Former Irish coaches Bill Lewis and Bill Reagan will take a closer look at South Florida and share their keys to the game. I'd like to thank our guests today, Muffet McGraw, Darius Walker, and Lou Emoji for joining us. Thanks as well to our student performers from Harmonia and the Glee Club. I'm Chris Palmquist from the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Go Irish, beat Bulls.
Mighty sons of Notre Dame, sing her glory and sound her fame. Raise her gold and blue and cheer with voices true. Rock for Notre Dame. Rock. We will fight in every game, strong of heart and true to her name. We will never forget her and will cheer her ever loyal to Notre Dame. Cheer, cheer for old Notre Dame, wake up the echoes cheering her name. Send the army cheer on high, shake down the thunder from the sky. Although the odds be great or small, Notre Dame will win over all. While her loyal sons are marching onward to victory. Cheer, cheer for Notre Dame, wake up the echoes cheering her name. Send the army cheer on high, shake down the thunder from the sky. Although the odds be great or small, Notre Dame will win over all. While the loyal sons are marching onward to victory. Onward to victory for Notre
Hello again, Irish fans. I'm Mike Sullivan with the Notre Dame Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome you back to Chalk Talk with Bill and Bill. For over 10 years, visitors to campus on a game day weekend would seek out Bill and Bill's presentation to get an expert insider view for the upcoming matchup. And so we're so very pleased to bring this to you digitally this year for every game, not just home games. So Bill and Bill refers to Coach Bill Lewis and Coach Bill Reagan, collectively over 60 years of college and professional coaching experience. Bill Reagan was the director of football operations under Ty Willingham and previously served as head coach at Rensselaer, St. Joseph College in Rensselaer, Indiana. And Bill Lewis, formerly the head coach at Georgia Tech, East Carolina, Wyoming, served here under Charlie Weiss as the defensive backs coach. Bill has also coached in the NFL for the Miami Dolphins and really a legend in the game. And they're here to give you a great analysis of tomorrow's matchup with South Florida. But before we get to that, we're going to review keys to victory from last week's game against Duke, and we'll see how on target they were with their assessment of the game. So let's take a look at those keys to victory from last week's game against Duke, and we'll go through them point by point and see how they did. So Bill Lewis, the first key to the game last week, would Notre Dame be able to adjust to the new scheme, the new attack that they saw from Duke? So how'd they do with that?
I thought they did well. And we have to remember that Duke's head football coach, David Cutcliffe, had taken over as the play caller. And so not knowing what Notre Dame practiced against, I thought they certainly adjusted well. I never had a feeling in looking at the entire game that there was something happening with the Duke offense that the Notre Dame defense had not only worked against, but were able to handle as it was happening in the game situation.
Bill Reagan, you talked about the need for Notre Dame to have this laser focus in order to be successful. What'd you think?
Well, and this was certainly in regard to not only a first ball game, but all the other challenges that have happened with all the kids in college football this year with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. And while it was not a laser focus, maybe, I think they came out ready to play. Low slopping the first half. One indicator I always look at are penalties. And Notre Dame on the game had 4 penalties for 39 yards. Not a bad penalty game. And one of the things we're looking for beyond that are those false starts by the offense, of which they did have one on the second series of the game. But overall, I'd say for first game, pretty good focus. Maybe not quite laser just yet.
Okay, Bill Lewis. So the ability to dictate tempo, handle game speed for the first time out. What'd you think?
As we look at the game tempo, I thought the Duke offense going into the middle of the third quarter still was very much in the game. And I think it's important when we're in a game like that to have the defense at some time take over. And I thought the Notre Dame defense, as we got late into the third quarter and then the entire fourth quarter, took the total tempo of the game, limited the Duke's defense, and allowed the offense then to have a lot of opportunities to put points on the board.
Okay, Bill Reagan, you made a great point about keeping Ian Book comfortable in that bubble, not just on campus, but on the field. How'd we do?
Well, initially you look at the game and you say, well, wow, Notre Dame struggled with their pass protection. And indeed, Ian Book was never really settled down in the pocket to find receivers. And, this is why it was a key, because this could go either way. And certainly the game was kept close because Book was not real comfortable there. As I look at it, though, a second time at the film, though, this was not an offensive line problem. We say good pass rush makes good coverage and good coverage makes good rush. And this was certainly a case of good coverage. He could not find receivers. He's back there when the ball should be gone, and he can't find anyone to throw to again and again and again. So I think that's something that caused problem, was good coverage by the secondary.
Okay, and then lastly, Bill Lewis, you really emphasized yak and yak, yard after carry, yard after contact. What'd you think about that?
Well, I thought that, and I'm going to jump over to the the Notre Dame's offense, because I thought there were some great examples in yards after contact. Kyron Williams gained 112 yards for the day, but he had a 26-yard run. And as you look at that particular play, there was contact within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. So as we look at that stat, yards after contact, there's 19, 20 yards that were gained after the initial contact. And those stats never show up in the final game stats. And then as you look at the second yak, yards after the catch, that's anybody who makes a catch. And I'm going to go back to Kyron Williams again. He had 2 catches for a total of 93 yards. One of those was a 75-yard completion. And as you look at that play, he makes the catch. There was either a bust in their coverage or somebody might have gotten picked by an offensive receiver, but he, in a route that could have picked up maybe 10 or 12 yards, ends up with a 75-yard reception. And again, those stats never show up in the final game stats.
Okay, well, all's well that ends well. The Irish are 1-0 and moving forward to week 2. Thanks for that great recap. And I'm looking forward to hearing your assessment of the matchup with South Florida.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second edition of Chalk Talk with Bill and Bill. For those of you who may not have seen our presentations in the past or come to one on campus at Notre Dame, what we'll do is for the next few minutes, I'll delve into kind of a history between Notre Dame and University of South Florida. We'll talk about some news, notes, and other interesting nuggets surrounding the game. And then I'll try to tell you a little bit about South Florida's defense. At that point, I'll turn it over to Bill Lewis, who will really dig into what he knows about South Florida's offense to this point in time. So with that, let's get going. So the 2020 game versus South Florida is the second ever game. First game took place in 2011. And I'm wondering if this is, even though that 9 years ago, kind of a revenge game for Notre Dame. And here's why. That being the leading reason. Quite an upset in Notre Dame Stadium. USF comes in and takes away a 23-20 upset to start the season in 2011. So let's take a look back at that game in 2011. First of all, how many of you out there were there? Let me see a raise of hands if you were at the game. I'm sure you remember it if you were, because it was eventful to say the least. I remember it well. I know exactly where I was sitting. I'm not going to tell you where I was sitting, at least not yet. This was one of the only game in Notre Dame history that was delayed and had a stadium evacuated. Now, as I go through these little notes here, I've got to thank Lou Samoji. He wrote an article earlier this week, and you may have heard Lou talk about some of these items in the earlier broadcast today as well. But Lou's certainly a historian of Notre Dame football, and I want to give him all the credit for these items. A lot of times I'll go through and find different sources, give me a lot of different things, but I found everything I needed in the article Lou wrote earlier this week. So even though this the game between Notre Dame and South Florida doesn't have much history at all, this game itself was very historic. And so that game was not only delayed, the stadium evacuated, but it happened twice during the same game. First delay lasted 2 hours and 10 minutes. It happened actually at halftime. So at least players were going off the field anyway. For those of you that were there or watching on TV, you remember that a second stadium clearing happened during the second half as well. It was and turned out to be the longest game in Notre Dame history. Let's just call it 6 hours of football or waiting for football. Now, even as strange as the weather occurrences that day were the game itself. So Notre Dame had 508 yards of total offense on the day compared to just UCF's 254. So Notre Dame exactly doubled USF's yardage, which alone you'd think, hey, we're coming away with a victory. However, the Bulls had a 5-0 advantage in turnovers. We'll talk more about this later on too, with regard to the game this year, because that's a perfect formula for upset. So included in that 5 turnovers was a 14-point swing with a 96-yard fumble return by South Florida for a touchdown. It just so happened to be the opening drive for Notre Dame, playing with all the confidence in the world, led by Dane Chris, straight down the field, handed the ball to Jonas Gray. He fumbled it on the 4-yard line, and it went the other way for a touchdown. UCF is coached by Skip Holtz on that day. And Skip, as you know, is the son of Lou Holtz. And so it was an emotional day at best, starting off for young Skip. And I can remember standing in the tunnel as the team bus for South Florida arrived. And Skip got off the bus and was extremely angry. At that time, I had no idea what happened, why he was so bent out of shape. The only thing I know to this day is that they stopped their buses coming in so that Notre Dame's buses could cross in front of them. Just a unique occurrence where those two sets of buses came together. But Skip Holtz got off the bus and was just livid, and he started walking into the stadium and he said, "No, I've got to go to the grotto and calm down." And he just stormed off and walked toward the grotto. And next time I saw him was on the football field, and he seemed pretty calm at that point. So he had settled down. But he had something coming in on the bus that day that gave him a lot of motivation for the game to be played that day. So yeah, the day started out gorgeous. This was a beautiful day for football. We had heard there were storms in the area and things were coming. But it was a beautiful day for that first ever meeting between South Florida and Notre Dame. After that, though, things changed. If you were there, you know what I'm talking about. And in the first delay, fans were told to evacuate the stadium. They didn't necessarily want to go. A lot of them kind of hung in around the exits. A lot of them went to the concourse below. But when that second evacuation came, it looked really nasty, and that's a picture from the upper right-hand corner there. So you knew things were pretty dangerous looking at that point. The lightning was everywhere, and that's a pretty empty stadium there. You'd be hard to stadium. However, when things went on the field, things didn't go right for the Irish either. And as I mentioned, were almost as bizarre as the weather occurrences. So here's the fumble on the left. You see the South Florida player ready to pick that up and scamper 96 yards for a touchdown. On the right, you can see Sierra Wood apparently going in to score a touchdown for the Irish on a nice run. That got called back due to penalty. So points were being lost all day long by Notre Dame, and that's, again, a formula for upset. Let's go ahead and look at some news, notes, and nuggets regarding the game tomorrow. And what we'll find, these are just a jumping around kind of different things. So attendance last week, right, was supposed to be 15,544. In actuality, it only became 10,097. Apparently, because of the short notice and tickets, the students were given the right of first refusal, and that's great. However, there was no time to offer those tickets again unless they did it at the gate, and because they were supposed to go with faculty and staff, they didn't do that. So they had only put up 700 some tickets for faculty and staff, and less than 10,000 students opted out to get the tickets. So they ended up with a crowd of just over 10,000. Only Kansas in 1933 and Washington, St. Louis in 1936 had smaller crowds. So hopefully the ticket office will be able to come up with a little better plan this week so that every seat that they want to be taken can be taken. But Notre Dame notched its first conference win ever. This week, don't search for the game on NBC. You won't find it due to contractual obligations that NBC was already in on for the U.S. Open, the golf U.S. Open. And I'm assuming something else on NBC Sports, probably a soccer game. You won't find it on NBC. You will find it. You will be able to find it on the USA Network. And so anybody with regular cable should be able to find the game there. So South Florida's offensive coordinator is 27-year-old Charlie Weiss Jr. It doesn't seem like that long ago where he was just a little guy standing on the sideline with Big Charlie. But he's worked his way up as a young assistant, kind of paid his dues, and people have given him an opportunity. Last 2 years, Lane Kiffin had him at Florida Atlantic University as the offensive coordinator. And in the last 2 years, he's had top 20 offenses. Weiss Jr. is the youngest offensive coordinator in the Football Bowl subdivision. And Notre Dame's Tommy Rees is the second youngest. So a lot of youth in those coordinator positions this week. South Florida has only had 5 head coaches, and 2 of them were former Notre Dame assistant coaches, Skip Holtz, who we already mentioned, and Charlie Strong as well. This week, going for 20 games in a row for the winning streak at the stadium. Currently, that is tied for the second longest in school history. If they win this week, they'll hold that spot all by themselves as the second longest streak in Notre Dame football history for winning games at home. So who are the South Florida Bulls? Let's take a little bit look at their football program and where they've come from. So they didn't start football until 1997, and for the first 3 years, they were a Division II, 1AA level. So for the last 20 seasons, they've been up at the FBS, the Football Bowl subdivision level. The Bulls have posted 15 winning seasons in that time. They have had 10 bowl appearances, and they've gone 6-4 in those bowls. South Florida spent a program record 20 straight weeks ranked in the top 25 during 2016 and 17. So that's a remarkable accomplishment, only starting football in 1997. The program reached as high as number 2 in 2007, and that was the fastest rise in the modern era of any team starting football and going into the top 10. Jim Leavitt was the initial coach for South Florida. He coached there for 13 seasons, had a record of 95-57 and 5 bowl games. It really was a remarkable job done by Jim Leavitt. You know, he had fertile recruiting area there in Florida, and they really took a lot of pride in recruiting the Tampa area for recruits, which was their home base basically. So this was an outstanding job done by Jim Leavitt, bringing it to that level. The Bulls coaching staff now, this year, ranks just above 36 years of age. So it is the youngest football staff in the AAC, the American Athletic Conference, and one of the youngest in the Football Bowl subdivision. Both coordinators for UCF a year ago were working for Lane Kiffin at Florida Atlantic University. So Lane Kiffin, as you know, went to Ole Miss this year, and the coordinators were available, and both were snapped up at USF. One other little thing, so the punter for USF is a 30-year-old Australian punter, Trent Schneider. He returns after a record-setting season, which he averaged 46 yards per punt. So just take note, their punter is a good one. He's also 30 years old. Maybe he can't go down and cover as well. So they also have a first-year head coach at South Florida. We want to know a little bit about this guy. So Jeff Scott follows Skip Holtz, Willie Taggart, Charlie Strong in that order. He replaces Charlie Strong. And each of those has added their own little bit to the legacy at South Florida. Skip's notably being the upset of Notre Dame. But he had 12 highly successful seasons at Clemson. The last 5 as co-offensive coordinator for Clemson. He saw the Tigers post a 75 record during that time, claimed 5 ACC championships. They made 5 straight college football playoff appearances. In the CFP, they've been there for 4 championship games in 15, 16, 18, and 19. Just a remarkable set of accomplishments there for Clemson. And they won national titles in 2016 and 2018. At 39, Scott is the youngest head coach in the AAC. All right, so let's take a little bit of a look at the defense for USF. The DC is the old guy on the staff. Glenn Spencer is 56 years old, so he's been around a little while. As I mentioned, he came from Florida Atlantic, where he really improved the squad last year in 2019. But for several years, he was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. Okay. So he runs what they call a 30 float defense that involves a ton of movement from the defensive backs to cause confusion and takeaways. And it's not just the defensive backs. You'll see the linebackers move around, a lot of fake blitzing. They come after you as well. So what is a 30 float defense, right? I wanted to find out by watching their game versus Citadel a week ago, so we could see this year's defense in action, which is great. And but I didn't learn a lot from that game because Citadel runs an offense very similar to Army, Navy, Air Force. It's a total option game, run-oriented offense. So anytime a team is facing one of those offenses, they really have their own way of doing it. It's a pretty generic front, and while it was a 3-3-5 setup, one where they were based on only stopping the run in the option game that the Citadel presented. They played fairly well last week. They did a nice job, but didn't teach me a lot about the 30 float defense. So I went back and looked at some Florida Atlantic film from a year ago, and here I saw a lot more movement of the secondary, a lot more movement of linebackers, a lot of blitzing, a lot of fake blitzing. A lot of times, one of those 3 linebackers in the 3-3-5 would walk up and become a defensive end as well. So a lot of times I believe tomorrow you're going to see kind of a 4-2-5 setup with one of the linebackers acting as a defensive end. He may have drop responsibilities. He may blitz. He may come from there. But it's the secondary that you need to keep your eye on. FAU, the Florida Atlantic team from a year ago, their defense led the nation in takeaways with 33, with 22 interceptions. So this is what they want to do. They want to cause havoc. They want to cause a misunderstanding of what they're doing. They want the quarterback to think one thing and give you another. But they're going to play 5 defensive backs the whole ball game. So like a lot of people, I think they'll try to stop Notre Dame's run. They'll use this 3-3-5 setup with a walk-up of one of those linebackers and come at you, and they're, as you'll see here, last week, they already lead the nation this year in takeaways with 3. So they're going to be aggressive. They're going to come after you, and they want turnovers. They returned 4 starters in their secondary, including senior all-backs KJ Sales and Mike Hampton. These guys are good. The Duke secondary a week ago was good. So these guys are almost as good, I would say, as the Duke secondary as far as coverage and as far as having multiple talents. You'll see a lot of diversity between blitzing and covering, and they're not afraid to walk up, cover you face to face on the line of scrimmage. They have a lot of confidence in their secondary. The Bulls defense has the potential to cause some issues. Their defensive line, however, is a major concern. There's not much depth there. Even though they're attacking the offense, they're trying to hide that defensive line a little bit. Although I did like number 23, Thad Markham. He wasn't even listed as a starter, but he had 9 tackles last week on the defensive line. So, and they knew their job. Their job was to stop the run with Citadel. But Thad Mangum did a nice job on their defensive line. So these are the 2 of the guys to watch on their defense. Dwayne Boyle is number 11. You'll notice he'll be the guy with the dreads coming out the helmet. At least he still had them last week. He only had 4 tackles and 1.5 for loss last week, but he had to be still a lot more. In the film from the year before, he was very active, lining up on the line of scrimmage, lining up as a linebacker, blitzing, covering. He may be their best defensive player. You know, he had 75 tackles, 3 sacks, and 12.5 tackles for loss a year ago. He's good size, 6'3", 227. But his counterpart at the inside linebacker, Antonio Greer, number 5, is also a big kid. All 3 of their linebackers are good size, which allows them to play that defensive end position. KJ Sales, as I mentioned, at cornerback last week, had 2 tackles, 1 for loss. Number 9, he is their best cover guy. Now, normally you'd say he'd line up over Notre Dame's best receiver, but that hasn't been determined yet. Who is Notre Dame's best receiver? So it'd be interesting to see where they place number 9, KJ Sales, in their secondary coverage. That's really as much as I can tell you about their defense. I know they want to be aggressive. I know they want to cause havoc. They saw that caused some problems for Ian Book this past week, and they don't want to stop it. It'll be very similar to the game plan laid out by Duke, but probably a little more aggressive in terms of blitz and man coverage. Okay, at this point in time, I want to turn the program over to Bill Lewis, my partner, and I can't say this enough about him. You'll be, I think, the detail which he presents a team's offense, even if we don't know a whole lot about it yet, will be impressive. And that's why Bill was the AFC 1991 Coach of the Year. Bill?
Thanks, Mike and Bill, and welcome to Chalk Talk. And what I'd like to do to start with is, I know we're going to talk about South Florida, but I want to reflect back to last Friday. Shortly after we finished our Chalk Talk, I received a phone call from our oldest son, Mark, who lives with his family in Bozeman, Montana. As I answered the phone, the first words I heard is, "Dad, you really messed up in your description of how cross motion would affect the defense." We enjoyed the rest of our conversation, and then later that night, I had a chance to go back and look at the show, and I'm wondering how many of you were as confused as perhaps Mark was, and sure enough, I had really messed up in that part of my presentation. All right, so let's take a look back at how and why do offensive teams use receiver extended cross motion. And I might mention at this time, we're going to see a lot of it from South Florida, and I think this will be something that will repeat during the season. The answer to that question is the offense gets a pre-snap read of the defensive pass coverage. Now, on this diagram, we've got a wide receiver using cross motion, and the defense is in a basic zone pass coverage. And this is what I refer to as cover 2, 5 under 2 deep. So as this motion occurs across the formation, the only thing that will on the defense is they might slide just a step or two in response to the change of the strength of the formation, but there's no drastic movement across the formation. The one thing I might, from a technical standpoint, is the Mike linebacker will always open with a 3 receiver side. He'll always open in cover 2 to that 3 receiver side. Now, the next thing is the offense has got the same type of motion, but the defensive call now was, and I drew up a Sam Mike blitz, which means the Sam and the Mike linebacker are going to blitz. This now creates a 6-man blitz pressure, which means the defense is probably in man-to-man coverage. And I've got these dotted lines, so the free safety is responsible for that man in motion, strong safety tight end. And right now, as this motion starts, what the quarterback's going to see is immediately that safety comes across the field. All right. And what will happen over here is the safeties know that they will either stick or switch. So if they're going to stick it, that free safety will continue to cover that man. If they're going to switch it, then he would stop and cover the tight end and the strong safety would handle the motion. The other thing that offenses will use is they'll use turnaround motion, where they'll start in motion and they'll see that safety start across the field. They know they've got man coverage, but instead of ending up in a 3-by-1 formation, he can very quickly turn around and come right back to the starting position, and they then would have a 2-by-2 pass route to run. Each week, I try to start the report by telling you what I'm basing this report on. And as I start looking at South Florida, I went back and looked at Clemson's last 3 games from last year, and Jeff Scott was the co-offensive coordinator. I then looked at the last 3 games of Florida Atlantic University, and Charlie Weiss Jr. was the offensive coordinator. Then I went to the first game of the South Florida season last week, the Citadel. Jeff Scott is now the head coach at South Florida. Charlie Weiss Jr. is the offensive coordinator. And I can't help at this point think of the last time I saw Charlie Weiss Jr. was on the Notre Dame practice fields, and he and his high school buddies were throwing the football around. And since then, he's learned a lot of football, I'm sure, from his dad, Charlie Weiss Sr., a man that I consider to be one of the finest offensive minds in football today. What are the common denominators I found as I looked at the last year's Clemson, the last year's Florida Atlantic, and then the opening game this past Saturday of South Florida? First of all 3 offenses are built around the zone read option package. Second, they all play in warm weather, and they play a lot of people to keep them fresh. I found that all 3 of them have a counter to the zone read option package. I found that all of them play a no-huddle, up-tempo offense. They play a lot of people to try to keep them fresh. They also have, all 3 of those programs have a lot of speed at the skill positions. By that, I mean quarterback, running backs, wide receivers, tight end, a lot of speed. Against the Citadel, they played a lot of people. They played 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 9 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, a total of 20 people at those skilled positions, again, to keep them fresh. All 3 of them have a real running threat at the quarterback position, and that makes a difference when you're running that zone read package. And the last thing is that the guy who's writing and drawing still does a lot of guessing of what he thinks the upcoming opponent might use. Let me talk about now the zone read option, and it's been very prevalent in especially college football since 1992. And you'll see that in all of these diagrams of the zone read option, the reference of zone means it's zone blocking at the line of scrimmage. Everybody working through a zone rather than blocking individual people. On this series, the ball is snapped to the quarterback. You've got a direct snap when he's in the gun, and he immediately turns, and as this back comes across his face, he rides him. But as he's doing that, he's reading that defensive end. If that defensive end stays on the line of scrimmage, that is a handoff read. He hands the ball off to that back, and what he does is he finds a soft spot in the defense. He might bring that ball all the way to the backside or hit anywhere along the offensive line. Now, the next play is everything happens the same. The ball snapped, the quarterback puts the ball in that running back's pocket. and he's reading that defensive end. Now that defensive end comes crashing to where he can make the play on the running back. He now pulls the ball and goes into the option phase. He's going to read the next defensive player outside that defensive end. If that linebacker comes to him, he will pitch the ball. If that linebacker will drift out here, he will turn upfield. So you've got the first phase is the dive. The second and third phase is the quarterback keep or the quarterback pitch. On each of those plays, this wide receiver is responsible for blocking that corner. That's going to be key as we look at the next play. Now, while the first two parts of this play are taking place, somebody in the press box is watching. How is the defensive reacting to this whole thing? So what they're going to do is they're going to test and they're going to find out how disciplined this cornerback is. So they start the whole read, and now he pulls the ball back. This pitch guy still works out here. This wide receiver now comes down and fakes like he's going to block as he did on those running plays, and he will release deep down the sideline. So they get a lot of big plays with that quarterback hitting that wide receiver. The other thing he can do is, again, up in the press box, they're watching what is this linebacker doing against that zone. Is he coming hard to the line of scrimmage? If so, that tight end will come down and fake him, and they can throw back here or a throwback. So you got a lot of play action stuff that can come off of that based on how the defense has reacted to the basic handoff of the zone triple option, or actually quad option. Now, as we look ahead to South Florida, and they ran a lot of the zone read option last week. And the other thing that was kind of unusual, they played a total of 3 tight ends, but number 85 and number 87 were on the field most of the time. And prior to the snap of the ball, they lined up in a lot of different positions. They could line up on the line of scrimmage. They lined up back in what we refer to as the H-back position here, or the H-back position here. And they even lined up back here in a halfback position. Then before the ball was snapped, they either shifted or they motioned to the position that they wanted to be in when the ball was snapped. All right. And the other thing that happened along with that is the running back from time to time up on one side, and then in the shift part of it, he ended up over on this side. And again, just so you understand that anybody can shift so long as when the ball is snapped, everyone is reset, or one person can stay in motion if he was the only person that moves. So we're going to see a lot of that before the ball is snapped. Now, as I mentioned, everybody who runs the zone read option, they have a counter series to it. And the first thing is what we call the counter trap. And so what happens, what the defense is seeing is on the snap of the ball, the quarterback and this back get into that ride position, but now what is called as a trap. And a trap is simply where you've got somebody that's going to pull, and they create a running seam here, and then the trap block comes here to create a running seam right up the field. So on the counter trap, the ball is handed to this back who hits that crease right there. The quarterback continues down the line of scrimmage to fake the rest of the zone read option. Also, what they can do is they can run this same play with the quarterback running it. And that play, this running back will just continue across the formation and block here. The quarterback, after the fake, he will run the trap option. They showed both of those plays in their opener last Saturday. The other thing that all offenses running the zone read option have is they have what is called a counter power off of that base play. And so on the snap of the ball, again, everything happens here in the backfield. Quarterback comes, he starts his read. And now your offensive line of scrimmage, the definition of a power play is people to the side that the ball is going to end up. Everybody on that side of the line of scrimmage blocks the first man to their inside. Then they bring one or two people from the backside. The first person comes and kicks out to create a running lane. The second, and this is where that tight end is very active, he would then lead up through. And the ball then is simply on this, there's just a slight delay here of this running back, just takes a little hitch step and up here, The quarterback hands the ball to him. He still continues down the line of scrimmage, but that back then breaks right back through on the counter play. The other thing that they can do is they will run the quarterback on that play. He'll fake to the fullback, and then he will be the one running the counter power. So you've got the counter trap, you've got the counter power to complement this whole offense. In their opening game last week, the running backs had 3 carries. All of them were the same play, what we call the jet sweep. And again, this is just something that comes back. You know, we're running that zone read dive, coming over here. And then all of a sudden, we put this guy in motion. He gets to right about here behind the guard tackle. The ball is snapped. And now South Florida, rather than hand the ball to him, they just toss the ball up. And this guy catches it on the way by. And it's a very effective play. This running back takes a drop step so that this all clears in front of him. And then after the ball is tossed, then he hits up in here in the quarterback, and he just kind of go through a late fake of the zone replay. But on that, everyone is zone blocking to the side of the sweep. And then, of course, these 2 wide receivers are very active in blocking the linebacker in the corner on that play. Everybody runs the bubble screen. All right. And what South Florida did in their opening game is they did it usually to the trip side of the formation. So again, now we've got that cross motion of this tight end or H-back to create 3 receivers over here. It's a very simple throw and catch for the quarterback. He takes the snap, this back comes in front of him, and there's just a real quick fake. But what we've got now is in college football, as long as the ball is thrown behind the line of scrimmage, everybody can release downfield. So on this, what you've got now is you've got a wide receiver here on the snap of the ball. He's going to come and block that corner. All right. This big tight end's going to come across, and he's going to turn up and block the first defensive man he sees. That'll probably be that linebacker. And then all of these other linemen, they just take off and start running to that side of the field and block whoever is in front of them. This wide receiver takes a step downfield and then bubbles back into the backfield, and the quarterback makes a high percentage throw out here, and then he just finds his seam in that particular play. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to throw the fake bubble. The guy who's responsible for that corner, he's going to start down the field and act like he's ready to play. And as soon as he sees this corner reacting to what's happening in front of him, he just turns down the field. The quarterback will come back, fake the throw out here, reset his feet, and throw the deep ball downfield. Now, if that is called in the huddle, these people cannot release downfield because the ball is being thrown across the line. So instead of releasing on the bubble screen, they would simply pass protect at the line of scrimmage. Once again, use of cross motion. One of the things that an offensive play caller wants to do is get his quarterback comfortable early in the game with throws that have a high percentage of completion. I mentioned the bubble screen, an easy throw. What does South Florida does is they run quick routes, 3-step routes where the receivers run 3 steps and break. And what they've got is usually out of a 4-receiver 2x2 on each side. This can be, again, going back to personnel groupings. All right. This could be 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers, or this could be 10 personnel with 4 wide receivers. But what they can do now is if they want all 4 receivers to run the same route, that's committed to them. They could have 2 receivers on one side running part of the quick game and the other 2 running the other. So let's say that they've got these people. This is a 3-step out route, 3-step out route. And the quarterback, if that's the side he's going to throw, that ball is a catch, a real quick fake, and it's a throw. If they call a 3-step double slant, you've got 3 steps here, slant, 3 steps here, slant. All right, quarterback, quick fake, and that ball is gone. So you got high completion, and your quarterback is easy to protect. The other thing they will do off of that, as soon as they see your defense being real aggressive on reacting to those quick throws, then off of the slant, they run what we call a sluggo or a slant and go. So he shows you that slant, breaks downfield, show that slant, break downfield. Off of the out routes. As soon as, again, they see those defensive backs run it, then they run what we call an out and up. So they're down here, show you that out route, and then turn in deep. So the quarterback will come, fake short, and then throw the ball deep on either of the side. South Florida will use a lot of cross motion to create three receivers. They've got the bubble. They can still run their zone read option and so forth. What they will then do is they will have a series of pass routes to where they've got three receiver routes on one side and they've got single receiver routes called on the backside. Now, one of the big things that's happening in football today is to throw what we call the back shoulder throw. So that would occur with the single receiver here running that back shoulder throw where that quarterback tries to put the ball between the receiver and the boundary, and he reverses, pushes back, and makes that catch. If he wants to throw to the three receiver side, the one route that I see showing off the motion, again, this is cross motion. So the quarterback is reading, is it zone coverage or is it man coverage? And a sail route is where we get three people in one section of the field. We've got a high receiver, the outside receiver running the go. We've got a deep corner route working up in front of him. And then we've got either a wide receiver or a tight end as the third route here. So the quarterback, again, he can get a quick fake back in here and he's looking high to mid to low, or especially if he sees man-to-man coverage by the adjustment to this, he's probably going to go back to this single receiver on the backside. I can't help but show you this route. As an old secondary coach, I always think that this is where they do a lot of picking. So if you're in man-to-man coverage, they're going to run receivers into your guys covering them. And so they do it. Again, it's off of a trips route, and it can come from that motion that I just showed you in the last play. But what is happening now is that you're going to get a lot of traffic. They're trying to create a lot of traffic in the middle of the field. So they're going to take these two receivers and run them on low routes. This guy running about a 4, 5, 6 yard route. This receiver running 8, 10, or 12 yard route. This receiver is going to come off. He's going to start downfield, and then he's going to come underneath of both those receivers. Now, what the quarterback's job is, I read man coverage, then I'm looking for this guy coming open because these guys are going to have some contact possibly with the guy covering him. If it's zone coverage, then they're looking to see how these linebackers, are they affected by the short routes? And I'm going to go deep behind them, or have they done their due diligence and dropped back here where I've got one of these shallow crossing routes on both sides? Again, they used this last week, and I think it's going to be a way that's going to be a kind of a principal part of their passing game. Last thing, very quickly, offense gets inside the 20-yard line. We refer to that as the red zone, or they're inside the 10-yard line or inside the 5-yard line. We refer to that as goal line. Once again, there's a lot of man coverage played at that time. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the same thing that we had up here with 3 receivers and a single receiver here. The quarterback reads man coverage. He's probably going to throw the back shoulder fade in the corner of the end zone. If he reads zone coverage, then he's going to go and go here. And what they're going to try to create is, again, some confusion with how these people drop in zone coverage, or if it's man coverage, you're going to get double picks. But what we've got now is we've got a shallow cross route here. If those linebackers get out of there in a hurry, he can throw that ball quickly there. Second guy is going to come down and run a deeper inside route, and that thing can flatten out if the ball's not thrown. And again, the linebackers stay short, they can go deep. But they're hoping that there's a lot of commotion in here to where this guy now comes and runs a deep corner to the back of the end zone, and that quarterback throws that ball there and lets him have all that field to adjust to. Once again, something that we're going to see down in the red zone or on the goal line. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And Bill, you've given us a lot to watch for on Saturday and a little too much to worry about. And Bill Reagan, I got to tell you, I did not enjoy your walk down memory lane. I've spent the better part of 9 years trying to forget every moment of that game, and you've just brought it all back. So thanks for that. So what we're going to do now is we'll pull this all together, and we'll take a look at some keys to victory. And hopefully we'll get to a few questions that have come in from our viewers who are interested to pick your brains a little more. So let's go to keys to victory now. Okay, Bill Reagan.
Oh, okay. I was waiting for the screen to come up. There we go. Okay, so the first thing is Notre Dame needs to be aggressive early on this week. I felt last week they were trying to feel out Duke a little bit, and Duke made no bones about it. Coach Cutcliffe came out during the week, and he said, we are going to be aggressive offensively, defensively, et cetera. And I think that showed in the first quarter. You know, Notre Dame finally turned the game a little bit when they became aggressive by running a fake punt back in their own territory. So I think they need to act more like a 25-point underdog than a 25-point favorite this week.
Second, I'm using the word havoc, and I've got right here in front of me, according to Webster, we define havoc as destruction and devastation. And as we, that's kind of weird talking about the game of football. So let's kind of look at where that might happen. I want to go back to August 14th, 1959. I'm a freshman at East Stroudsburg State Teachers College, and I'm in our first team meeting with a new head coach, a man by the name of Jack Gregory, who did so much for me. But he's talking about the very first objective for the offensive team is to finish every possession with a kick. When he said that, there was a lot of looking around of the players in the room. First year head coach is telling us we're going to end every offensive play with a kick. What he's referring to is we want to end with a point after touchdown, extra point kick. We want to end with a field goal, or we want to end with a punt. So now come back to 2020. Defensive teams are now keeping havoc stats, plays that they're able to make against the offensive team that can turn the tide of a game. And the two things that are going to be a real factor in Saturday's game, I think everyone has the feeling that the Irish will be a pre-game favorite. So what can happen to kind of tilt that? During possessions, the defense causes and recovers a fumble. Number two, a defense causes and intercepts the ball. Go back to 1959, what did Coach Gregory say? End every possession with a kick. You recover a fumble, you recover an interception. They don't have the benefit of kicking the PAT, three-point field goal, or at least establishing field position with a long punt. So Notre Dame has to do a great job, their defense, of creating those change of possession havoc plays, and the offense has got to make sure they do a good job of avoiding that South Florida defense getting those havoc plays. In the future, I'm going to talk a lot more about this in future weeks.
So our next key is to win the turnover battle. Lou Samoji mentioned this earlier, as well as the only key. You know, this was important in 2011, right? 5-0 takeaways by South Florida. Already this year, South Florida leads the nation in takeaways. Coach Spencer's defense at Florida Atlantic a year ago led the nation in takeaways. We can't let that, Notre Dame cannot let that be a factor in the ball game. Win the turnover battle, you win the game.
After my description of the zone read quad option, I think it's important to know that every call that the Notre Dame defensive coordinator will make Saturday afternoon, someone on the defense is going to be responsible for the running back, the handoff. Someone is going to be responsible for the quarterback. Someone is going to be responsible for the pitch, and someone's going to be responsible for the play action pass. What happens so often, and a great example was in watching the Clemson offense last week against Wake Forest, a game that has nothing to do with this. But Clemson's first 2 touchdowns, they ran the zone read option. Nobody had the quarterback, and he ran untouched into the end zone. So it's important. If you have the dive, you take the dive. Don't let your eyes be somewhere else. If you've got the quarterback, make sure you take him. Make sure you either tackle him close to the line of scrimmage or make him pitch the ball. If you got the pitch man, make sure you're there. And then if you're responsible for that deep play down the field off the play action, if not, it can turn the game in a hurry.
Our final key is receivers get open. It was kind of frustrating to watch the game last week, and you're watching it on TV now. When we go to the game, we have the luxury as a former coach of watching the field wherever we want. And I like to watch the secondary and what's going on with the wide receiver core. You can't really see that on TV. And we get kind of frustrated watching Ian Book not throw the ball. But if you watch that game, you can see he's looking for receivers. Nobody's open. And then the rush gets to him, right? There was ample protection last week. The offensive line did a very credible job with a pretty good pass rush from the Duke front. So what's it come down to? Is it scheme where these guys aren't getting open? Is it great coverage by the secondary? Or is it simply poor route running and having that inexperience or lack of experience with your receivers? There was one particular frame that we could see where NBC did an end zone view, and you could see all the receivers run down on a critical 3rd down route, and every receiver ran to get covered. There was no breaking route. There's no route adjustments being done. And again, not knowing Notre Dame's offense in and out, you don't know if they were supposed to adjust their route. You don't know if it was just a poor scheme for that coverage. But this week, receivers have to get open. Hopefully there's better chemistry between the receivers and Ian Book.
All right, great stuff. And of course, we're going to hold you guys accountable for that analysis next week. We'll check in, see if you were right. Okay, at this point, we're going to go to some questions that have come in from our viewers all over the country. And the first one has to do with South Florida's personnel taking scheme out of it. How do they match up with our guys? Bill Reagan, go ahead.
Well, I can say this, that, the point spread is 25 and maybe 26 for a reason. The personnel doesn't match up. And that's why both in the things Bill has pointed out and I've talked about with their defense, why we're going to see, this aggressive kind of a scheme by South Florida. They've got to take chances. If they're going to stay in the ball game at all, they've got to get, I don't want to say lucky, because it's when you take some chances that may pay off. But they're going to be trying to out-scheme Notre Dame because they can't out-personnel them up and down the board, up and down the line. They do have a good secondary. Bill spoke to some talent on their offense, but across the board, it doesn't work for South Florida.
Bill Lewis, what did you see there with their personnel?
I think the one thing that could be a factor in the game is the speed of their skilled people. If we make some critical mistakes on the field, for example, we don't take the dive. The dive breaks the line of scrimmage. They got some running backs that can make the big play. Their quarterbacks last week, when there was no one responsible in the defense for the quarterback, they made some plays. So I think it's going to be, if we are not real sound on the defensive side of the line of scrimmage, the personnel that they have at those skill positions, they're good enough to make enough big plays to cause the Irish some problems.
Okay, let's go to another question. And this has to do with improvement from week 1 to week 2. What are the key areas? And again, we'll start with Bill Reagan. Key areas we need to see Notre Dame improve. Let's go with on the Notre Dame offensive side of things, Bill Reagan.
Well, I mentioned it already. The passing scheme in terms of receivers getting open absolutely needs to be better. I was happy with the offensive line pass protection. Offensive line run blocking could certainly stand to improve. I remarked to myself, one time I saw our left tackle, Hainsey, get knocked backwards when they were trying to run an outside zone scheme. You can't have that kind of thing. If you're going to run a zone, you've got to be aggressive and you got to move people. You can't take the hit. You want to play in their backyard. Don't let them play in your backyard. So those two things, I think receivers getting open and offensive line run blocking could stand to improve.
Bill Lewis, the Notre Dame defense, had a pretty good day at the office last week, but what are some areas you'd say they need to improve upon?
Well, I don't know if it's need to improve as much as they need to dominate in the game. There earlier in the week, as we got reports from South Florida, there's some questions of some of the offensive line of scrimmage, whether they're going to have players available for the game. I think you need to take and have our defensive front seven dominate the line of scrimmage from the get-go. Anytime you play a team that's a 25-point underdog or something, don't encourage them. Let's take control of the game at the very beginning, and usually it's a defense against offense. Let that defensive front seven dominate the line of scrimmage. Knock that quarterback on the ground a few times. Get his uniform dirty early in the game. Let him know that if he's going to try to keep the ball off the option, that there's going to be something to pay at the end of that play. So I think it's not a matter of the improvement. It's the matter of right from the get-go taking charge of this thing at the line of scrimmage.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, both Bill Reagan, Bill Lewis. If we were back at the X Center in person, it wouldn't be uncommon for this conversation to go on another 20 minutes with folks from the audience, but we're going to have to leave it there today. But we do invite everybody around the country to join us again next Friday at 1:15 for Chalk Talk with Bill and Bill as we preview the upcoming game with Wake Forest. Until then, as always, stay safe, stay well, go Irish. Thanks, everybody.